Hi, everyone. Welcome today. Jacqueline, thank you very much for your presentation. We've been watching it here. It's very, very interesting, and I think we are broadly in agreement with what you had presented.
Oh, great, thank you.
I'm going to start the first question, building on your presentation, and maybe you could answer first, and then Christoforos can continue on this topic. And I'm going to go to the level of how Cyprus can implement its strategy. I believe you're absolutely right that international students start by selecting a country first and an institution second. And we are competing with some extremely well-known countries, extremely well-known institutions, both at the country level. The countries are not just well-known as countries, they're well-known as educational destinations, right? If you think about the UK, the US, but even Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and some of the newcomers, Russia and China, are still vastly more known than Cyprus in general. And Cyprus is objectively small, right? So the size of the country, the number of resources we have, the resources the university have are small. In this context, and noting that the first step is getting the country awareness, practically, what do we do?
Well, big question, of course, but I think it starts with having a real strong joined up strategy. If you think about the student journey as, again, being a very long one, you can consider them coming to the island for an English language education to start out with. For example, you've got good language schools there, so that works as a nice pathway to get students excited about the island of Cyprus, to get them comfortable with the offers that are there, the wonderful educational experience that they're going to have. That makes them create content, which then you can share on social media. Students like to listen to other students, right? Peer-to-peer recruitment is some of the most powerful marketing that there is out there. So looking at ways for the higher education sector to work, let's say, more closely with the language sector is a big one. Looking at vocational sector and opportunities for work experience, critically important. When I talked about some of the commonalities that some of these education destinations have, a lot of that does have to do with visa or immigration opportunities. Students are very practical today. They want to have practical work experience which directly relates to their degrees. They don't want to just be a waitress in a coffee shop. They want to have experience that relates to their degrees. So if Cyprus can work on these kinds of opportunities for students to work part-time during their studies, to get 1 or 2 years, to stay on the island and to get that work experience with the companies that you've got there, that's going to put you in a very strong position. So those are some of the things to think about, let's say, to get started.
Thank you. Christopher?
Well, I mean, if I was certain about the answer, we would be doing it. But I totally agree with what Jacqueline said. And there is a series of things that Cyprus has to do, and it has to do all of them. My understanding is that you cannot fail at one dimension, say the work experience, and expect things to happen. You have to have the quality, you have to have the environment, you have to have the safety, you have to have the housing, and you have to have everything. So I think the first thing that needs to be done is to make sure that we are okay as a nation in all dimensions. Equally important is the issue of developing a common approach towards the branding of the country. We are definitely too small as institutions to be able to become known in the world arena, and we are most likely small as a country. But we have to develop, I think, entities that promote the country itself. And after all, there are several positive things to have higher education in Cyprus, and we have to make an effort to commonly promote them. How exactly this can be done, it's a big discussion, but I think this is a direction that has to be very clear.
Okay, so I think you're broadly in agreement that it needs to be a common effort, and there need to be certain rather straightforward parameters. How can you get a visa? How can you work? What do you have housing and so on in place? Let's say we get past that phase. So we have a common initiative, we have those things in place, which we don't really yet, but let's say the next year we do. And you had put a slide up earlier in your presentation that said, well, here's China, it's a large, very large, but slightly shrinking market, and there's a trade-off between big cities and secondary cities. And then there are markets that are emerging, India, Indonesia, Ethiopia. They're smaller now, but are growing more in the next 5 years. How do you think about the question of, do we try and make an impact in 10 countries, 1 country, 2 countries? How does one think about that framework?
Yeah, this is a great question and one that many will ask as well. So thank you for that. It's important as an education hub to have diversity, right? I mentioned not being over-reliant on 1 or 2 key markets. So the grand goal might be to have a lot of variety in terms of cultures and countries that are coming to Cyprus. But it's also important to be realistic. It's very dangerous to spread yourself too thin and to try to be everywhere at the same time. So usually with a strategy, I would say let's be very deliberate. Let's say we take our top 5 or our top 7 markets and really get to know those markets, concentrate on them, work on strategic partnerships in those countries, work with governments, be seen and be present at events that are happening there, whether it's virtual or in person, but really concentrate on a few key markets to begin with. And you do that for a few years, and then you branch out to some new markets and some new markets and some new markets. You can't go and hit 20 countries all at once. It's going to make you spin your wheels and perhaps waste your resources a little bit as well. So I'd say pick a few and go there. You've got a strong showing from Greece. That's an easy win for Cyprus in a way, right? You know the market. And you've got a good showing from India, and as I mentioned, Pakistan, Bangladesh, those are fine. Lots of great market opportunities across the African continent. And I would look at some of the markets where you've already got a few students that are coming, let's say 50 or 60, something like that, and look at those markets and see where can we dig deeper? Can we get more out of some of these markets? What are some of our strongest sending markets that we can double down and put more efforts into, and look at those personas to try to find where are the students that really have the best match for coming to us. So when you look at the numbers, you look at the personas, you look at your resources, you pool together, it all starts to kind of gel.
Can I ask you something, Jacqueline, based on what you said, also in your presentation, but just now in your answer, you mentioned the issue of collaborations, of institutional collaborations. This is something that in Cyprus has not really been done. Our institutions have organically grown, and I think we can feel happy with what we have achieved up to now, but more or less this have been done on our own accord. How do you envisage these collaborations? Do you think that we should seek collaborations with institutions in the countries that we want to attract people from? You feel that we should seek collaborations into the leading countries like, let's say, the UK and so forth? How do you envisage this collaboration concept?
So I think I'd come back to the matchmaking type of a concept. So if you've got your institutions here and there in Cyprus, let's say, looking at some of the key programs, what are some of the most attractive programs that these universities are offering, and find sort of a like for like, let's say, program overseas somewhere where you can easily set up a partnership to exchange students that are focusing on those programs, that you have an interest in your country, they have an interest in their country. It'll be a little bit easier when it comes to credit transfers and recognition aspect, and try to find those universities overseas in the markets where you've got already a bit of a foothold. So again, it's a matchmaking type of thing. Try to find institutions that are like yours overseas, but that have obviously a different educational experience for that student. Does that help a bit?
Yeah.
Let's go to the point that you mentioned about personas, which I believe is, of course, true. Right? There's different students who come to university for different reasons. Since the personas are primarily psychographic, they're not demographic, they're not going to come necessarily from an IP address, right? It's not everyone from Greece is academic, or everyone from Lebanon is going to be an adventurer. how do you actually operationalize that insight? How, I mean, because the idea that I understood is that you'd send certain marketing messages to different types of personas, but it's not immediately clear to me how you would know these things in advance to be able to tailor the message.
Great, great. Another good question. Thank you. So this is a bit of our marketing magic coming into the foreground here. So personas do have a demographic aspect to them as well. A rich persona will have demographic information, it'll have purchase and decision-making criteria, and it'll have what I call kind of the softer side about their personalities, their goals and aspirations. So a good persona is kind of a rich mix. But indeed, you might have an adventurer from India and an adventurer from Brazil in two totally different markets. So a lot of the ways that an institution can start out can be through some geo-targeting, and let's say an engagement tool, giving students a choice. So if you're in Brazil and you come to the website, you've got two choices to make. Are you more interested in our programs? Are you more interested in what it's like to live and study in Cyprus? As a very basic example. And based on where that student goes, then you know, okay, he might be a little bit more of this type of a persona, so we want to show him or her this type of information. And you pull them through the funnel with information that you think will fit that persona. And you look at your tracking and your marketing along the way. So let's say they sign up for a newsletter or they request information. You have one track of information that goes to one type of persona, a different track of information that goes to a different type of persona. A lot of institutions will use quizzes, things like BuzzFeed, which became very popular years ago and still is. Students still like taking quizzes. They want to know, where do I belong? You know, what type of institution is for me? What kind of a career can I get with this degree? So ways of using engagement tools can help you to understand who is the student that I'm talking to and what kind of information should I send to them that's going to be most relevant for them. Could be through geolocation, could be through engagement tools, could be through dedicated landing pages as well, doing some A/B testing, let's say, with your ads and seeing which paths people take and which is more appealing for them.
Christopher, how do you think about this issue at your institution?
I think, firstly, it's a matter of identity. An institution needs to have a clear idea on what sort of personas it wants to appeal to. And from what I understood from what Jacqueline was saying, there needs to be a clear and directed message towards these personas that you want to engage with. So if you want to attract adventurous people, you need to find ways of having a clear message towards this sort of persona group. And maybe a university is not suited for all types of persona. So I think this is why I said it's first a matter of identity. There can be a university that says, okay, I will not focus or compete on the academic level because there are institutions that are much more established and esteemed than me, and I want to focus on the student experience. And they need to focus their messages and material towards that. So what I took from this and what I think has to become clear to all of us is to firstly identify the personas that we wish to be appealing to, and then ensure that we have clear message towards them. I'm sure the marketing people will love the work they need to do. But
Now, I think this is right, and I think there's a good segue from this into programmatic differentiation. In Cyprus in particular, for their breadth, the universities are small. So if you look at the total operating budget of all Cypriot universities combined, which is 8 of them, it's 330 million euros a year. Whereas a big land grant university in the United States, which is just one university, might be $1.25 billion a year. And this is because most of them started off serving the domestic market. And to get to any size, one had to have a variety of programs. As we now look more externally, how do we think about the question of being comprehensive or somewhat comprehensive versus being specialized now at the institutional level?
I guess I'll go
Yeah,
first
yeah,
again.
yeah. Sorry, that was for you, Jack. Sorry, I'm looking at you, Jacqueline. Sorry.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, so I mean, as was mentioned just before, it's about finding the right personas, finding the right fit and the right match, looking at your programs as well. Yes, there are some institutions that are huge, they've got bigger budgets, more programs on offer, but there is beauty in being niche or in being small. Particularly in times of disruption as well. Let's come back to America, which is a nice example and obviously a huge market. So with the COVID crisis that's happened this year, what we saw in February, it's some staggering figures, and I'll just check my notes here to get these correct. So imagine this, okay? Since February, there have been over 337,000 job cuts. That's a 9.8% reduction in the workforce just in the higher education sector alone. This is the biggest ever that's happened in America. Now, what's interesting about this is starting in May, smaller institutions started rehiring, whereas the larger institutions have not been able to do that. So the smaller you are, it's not necessarily a disadvantage. It can mean that you're more nimble, you're able to move faster, especially in times of crisis.
Christopher, how do you view this?
Well, I think like Jacqueline's point was very insightful, and we, of course, know the situation much better. I think in the medium term, there needs to be some consolidation of the portfolio of programs of study that Cypriot universities can maintain. There is little value in having, let's say, within a city of a couple of 100,000, 3 business degrees. How this will happen, I am not sure, and this is something that needs a lot of discussion, but I think that we should aim at becoming more niche and focused on the skills that and the qualities that we have, and there can be some form of like a more federated environment where universities can collaborate, especially when directed towards the international market. This is a very small country, and I think we cannot afford to have too much independence.
Makes
You know,
sense. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Jacqueline.
oh, if I could just add, just again, to look to other countries, to learn some lessons, to learn some best practices. So 2 great countries to look at it with regards to consolidation could be Finland and New Zealand. Both of them have started to consolidate some of their institutes of technology. Some of those are merging into bigger research universities as well, or just consolidating the sector. So as you say, if you've got a small nation, which small in relative terms is the case, then it's not a bad thing to consolidate your energies and your resources. It does make the offer a bit more crystallized and a bit more clear for prospective students, but you're also pooling minds, pooling resources. So there are other countries to look at and just kind of see how are they doing it, what are they doing, what's the criteria that they set forth, how do they manage through that merger. Mergers can be sticky processes, of course, so learning from others is a great way forward as well.
Great. Well, let's switch to the pandemic. And I'm going to ask a leading question here. You know, one of the things that you read is that in the pandemic, we've discovered that online education is important. And I mean, that's true, I suppose, though. I mean, the United States, this has been going on for 30 years. I think in the UK for 20. If you look at distance learning in the UK, 50, 60 years. And even in Cyprus, which, I mean, it's not a technological hotbed, I think most of the universities had significant online degree programs even before the pandemic, right? But the question I'd like to ask is the following. To me, what it showed us might be the opposite for undergraduate education. Because if you look at the student reaction, at the undergraduate level, we got an opportunity to test online education or distance education. And it was acceptable from the perspective that it allows us to get through the crisis. But it has not been my impression, either in Cyprus or in the United States, that the students were particularly thrilled about it. Whereas in postgraduate education, it is quickly becoming the kind of default mode for working adults to study online and remotely. What's your view? Let's start with you, Jacqueline. What's your view on this?
Yeah, it's it kind of comes back to people also not liking change. Students have this great expectation for higher education. And if you can imagine the mindset of, a 19-year-old student or something, they've been dreaming about going overseas for a long time. This is not an overnight decision. This is something that's been planned for many years. And so if that dream is suddenly kind of pulled out from under them and they're forced to learn online, sitting in their home, it's a little bit disheartening for even the best of us. So if you look at the mindset that a student has going into his or her educational experience, that's going to impact a lot on their satisfaction criteria at the end of the day. Older students, grad students, yes, they're juggling families or jobs, so they quite enjoy the flexibility of remote learning, and that fits their need at the time. But a 19-year-old's needs are very different. They need socializing with other cultures and other people. They need to break out, let's say. Some of them are those seeker students. They want to get away from home. They want to go as far away as possible. So it's kind of a natural reaction that they're not going to be as excited about it. That, of course, puts a little bit more pressure on institutions and on professors to make that experience as collaborative, as interactive, and as engaging as possible for students. And not everyone does learn well online. Every learner is different. Some will respond to it okay, and some will struggle. So it's hard to be able to meet all of the satisfaction criteria for all of those students. But I think from what I've seen, educators are doing so much to try so hard. Most people I know, and I'm sure yourselves included, have all been working 10 times harder this year to try to do what was sort of natural and normal, in any other year. So I think in some ways it's also important for institutions to share that, to lift the veil, to take people behind the scenes and show them how hard that they're working so that empathy factor is a bit more two-way. A lot of institutions are having really strong touch points with students as well, checking in on them constantly to say, how are you doing? How are you finding this? What else can we do? The more those two-way communications open up, the more you'll be able to get through this. And, it's not a short-term solution now. We know that this is going to be with us for a while. So it's important to now have that mentality of, okay, we got through the rough part. Now we know what to expect. Operational, functions is fine. Now let's up our game and let's really enhance this experience for students in the next year or two to come.
Christopher, what's your view on
Well,
this?
Undergraduate study is a formative experience. Postgraduate isn't. Students, probably from their parents or the environment or the movies or anything, I think they will, for the foreseeable future, want to have a face-to-face environment where, like I said before, they need to have the campus, they need to have the socialization, they need to have the education, they need to have all these things. And I think that this is something that we have to accept. However, it's not an issue of technology. Technology has been good enough for a few years now, and this has been proven forcefully with the pandemic. However, I think also the pandemic will, after it goes away, will leave a lot of technology issues with higher education at undergraduate level as well. So a lot of the advances that were achieved will complement the face-to-face education. So I think that things will become more modular and more flexible, but I cannot see a way that the undergraduate education will move to distance learning. Not in the near future, not in the medium future.
Great, thank you. Okay, I've been informed we have 2 minutes left, so I think we have time for one more question. And I'm going to ask for this question that we skip the day-to-day, we skip the immediate future, and many people believe we're in a period of radical technological change the next 20 years. AI, VR, AR, blockchains, biotech, etc. 25 years from now, what's different at a university?
Oh, wow, 25 years in 2 minutes.
1 minute, you have to give Christopheros a minute too.
Well, oh gosh, I mean, where do you begin? 25 years is a long time. Certainly, I like your answer as well about modular. We've seen a lot more micro learning, credentialing, nano degrees, lifelong learning. It wouldn't surprise me if you see a lot of people picking and choosing credentials as they get older and as the world changes so fast. So maybe having that traditional 4-year degree or 5 years isn't necessarily definitely needed by employers. Maybe they're more interested. And we're starting to see glimpses of this now with students basically designing their own degrees and choosing credentials. So that would be a nice way forward, I can imagine, to have a lot more flexibility in terms of a design a degree for the consumer who is now incredibly empowered and for a world that's changing very quickly.
Christopher?
Uh, I wouldn't be confident saying what will happen in 5 years. My answer is I really don't know. So I think we can keep it here. But maybe you didn't tell us your opinion.
I don't know if we're out of time or not, but I think it will become more lifelong learning. I think that's part of it. I think the gap between online and on campus will blur dramatically. Like we'll have very good augmented reality, virtual reality by then. And so I suspect we will see consolidation in 25 years globally, not domestically.
Yeah.
And you might see things that don't look like universities today that are delivering what we consider to be some of the core missions of universities. But I think with that, I'd like to thank you both for the excellent discussion and thank everyone for inviting us.
Thank
Thank you.
you. Yeah, thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of the conference as well.
Thanks.
Thank you.